Okay, so thank you for joining us today, everyone. As a quick reminder, all GSA online events are covered by a code of conduct. The link for that will be available in the chat momentarily. If you experience technical issues at any point during this seminar, please post in the chat. Engagement staff will be monitoring and will do our best to assist you. With that, I'm going to turn us over to Dr. Mendoza. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Jess. All right, hello, everyone. Welcome to the GSA Grants and Funding panel discussion. My name is Adelita Mendoza. I am a postdoc at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and I am your moderator for today's session. We will be discussing helpful information about applying for research funding in the United States and internationally. We will hear from funding agency representatives who will each provide their perspective on research funding. Today, we will hear from Chris Mcmaster from the Institute of Genetics in Canada, Jianka Matrai from the European Research Council, Arisu Wada from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, and Manju Hingorani from the National Science Foundation Genetic Mechanisms Program. A link will be posted in the chat so that you can read more about our panelists. Now we will have each panelist introduce themselves and give a description about their experience with grants and funding. So let's start first with Chris Mcmaster.
Hi there, folks. I'm Chris Mcmaster. I'm the Scientific Director for the Institute of Genetics at the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. That's half my job. The other half is actually being a professor at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Canada. The Canadian Institutes of Health Research is similar to the NIH in the States. It's the largest funding body for research across all spectrums of health research for both universities, research hospitals, and increasingly the community within Canada.
Great, thank you. Next, let's hear from Jianka Matrai.
Yes, thank you, Adelita. It's an honor to be here and welcome everyone. So I'm Jianka Matrai and I am a scientific officer at the European Research Council. And I cover fields within the agency which belong to bioinformatics and neuroscience. But of course, I am here today as a generalist, and I hope that I can answer all of your questions. Thank you.
Great. Next, let's hear from Arisu Wada.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this occasion. And hello, everyone. I am Arisu Wada, Deputy Director of JSPS Washington Office. I have been in the US since last October. So let me briefly introduce about JSPS, which stands for Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. It is an independent administrative agency established by a national law, contribute to the advancement of science in all fields of natural science and social science and humanities. So JSPS supports research based on curiosity-driven research and free ideas of researchers. And for the international program, JSPS focuses on mobilizing researchers and establishing a strong international network. So we support both international research groups and individual researchers, and inbound and outbound. So today I'd like to explain a little more about the JSPS International Fellowship Program during the Q&A session. Also, after completing your fellowship, you can join JSPS Alumni Association in the United States, Canada, Europe, and Asia for further networking. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And next, let's hear from Manju Hingorani.
Hi, everybody. I'm Manju Hingorani, Program Director in the Genetic Mechanisms Program. This is in the Biological Sciences Directorate at the National Science Foundation. And I came here after 20 years as a biochemistry professor at Wesleyan University in Connecticut. So NSF, as many of you probably know, is a US federal agency that was created in 1950 with the goal of promoting science and advancing the health, prosperity, welfare, and the national defense And it funds fundamental research across all scientific and engineering disciplines through 8 directorates, and that includes the Biological Sciences Directorate. That'll be the most relevant to the audience here. We also have a new directorate. It was formed just a few weeks ago after 30 years, I believe, and that's Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. And that directorate has been created to enable translation of the basic research that NSF funds through the rest of the foundation, to enable its translation to benefit society. And I can take some time to tell you about the Biological Sciences Directorate now and through questions. The Bio Directorate comprises 4 divisions across scales in biology, and it supports research in these from the molecular to the ecological scales, and it supports research cross-disciplinary research, research at all career stages, from high school students on. And I'm happy to discuss with you any funding opportunities that you're interested in, and answer any of your questions.
Great, thank you all so much for your introductions. We are in good hands here for this panel. All right, so today's panel will be conducted as a Q&A style session. If you have questions for panelists along the way, please post them in the chat. If you have a question for a specific panelist, please indicate who, so I can properly direct the question. And just as a reminder, our session will be closed captioned and we'll have line transcription. This event will be recorded and also posted to our YouTube channel. So with that, let's get into the questions. Okay, so first question, could you give a brief overview of the funding model of your institution? I think some of you covered a little bit of this. If anyone wishes to expand more, that's okay.
It's Chris. I can add a little bit more to CIHR in Canada if you'd like. So CIHR funds graduate students and postdoctoral fellows primarily through 2 mechanisms. The major mechanism is actually operating grants or project grants given directly to professors, from which professors can then hire students or fellows. Those competitions are twice per year, and those are on the web. If you just Google CIHR, and there's a list of everybody who's funded and when. It's usually a good time to bug people is when they've just received a grant, because those are the folks who are looking to hire. There is also a direct mechanism where, as a graduate student or a postdoctoral fellow, you can apply to CIHR with or without a supervisor in hand. And you can actually get money directly for yourself, independent of a supervisor, although it's usually a good idea to have somebody in mind. And then take that money and study with whomever you like. So those are the 2 ways to do it. That's once per year in the fall, whereas project grants to faculty members are spring and fall. And it's a great idea to just go on the CIHR website, see who's recently funded, and contact those folks directly. You can contact CIHR and ask for the list anytime you want, and they'll send it to you as well, in terms of everybody who's funded, because it's publicly facing information. So I would say if you're looking to come to Canada, those are probably the 2 easiest ways to get here.
Great, thank you. And I see that Manju has her hand raised.
I think Yanka had her hand raised earlier, so let her go first.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Manju. Thanks for again. And so I would just like to continue along this line, answering the first question. In the European Research Council has funding instruments which fund researchers, anyone who has received a PhD at 2 years or a longer period at the time of application. And so we don't target with our grants high school or PhD students. In that sense, we build upon other available grants in the European funding scheme, and these are typically the Marie Curie funds. But of course, there are many other national funds. So the European Research Council is a funding agency that funds researchers across Europe, but also I would like to extend this to other countries outside of Europe, because we, with these grants, first of all, would like to attract researchers to Europe, but at the same time, and I would like to very much highlight this, we don't ask our researchers to burn bridges. So our time commitment to Europe is maximum, it can be as low as 50%, and our researchers can keep the other affiliation if they want so in other countries outside of Europe and any other countries on the planet. And our grants are in 3 different schemes, the so-called single PI or single principal investigator grants, which are the starting for the young researchers, 2 to 7 years after obtaining the PhD, and then from 7 to 12 years after PhD are the consolidator grantees, and finally our advanced grantees where there is no age limit. And so we have these basic grants, as we call it, but we have also a very interesting grant, which is the Synergy grant. And here, this is a consolidator it's a collaborating type of grant among 2 to 4 principal investigators at any stage of career. So starting, consolidator, or advanced, that doesn't matter. And one of the collaborators can be located fully 100% outside of Europe. And in addition to this, we have several other opportunities, which we call additional opportunities. If there is any interest on that, I can explain later, or I can send the information about that in the chat. And these are typically visiting fellowships or bilateral associations and agreements between a given European host institution and a host institute in a country outside of Europe. Yeah, and just maybe with one sentence about what type of research we fund. So we fund any type of curiosity-driven bottom-up research. It doesn't matter whether it's more technologically oriented or basic research. And our aim is really to kind of put our trust into the excellent idea of our applicants. And this idea can be a high risk, but at the same time, hopefully a high gain research idea. And we support the creative freedom and independence of our researchers. So we really want to create new centers of excellence, and starting up with a young PI or the consolidator PI, or in fact continuing excellent research groups already whose PI is in the advanced stage. Thank you.
So I can follow up on that by emphasizing that the NSF also funds basically curiosity-driven research. So just fundamental research across all the science disciplines. Again, I think this audience may be most interested in the Biological Sciences Directorate. So most of the funding support that Bio hands out is through investigator-initiated grants. So these are to single or pairs of investigators who apply for 3 to 5 year grants with projects that involve graduate students, undergraduate students, postdocs, sometimes even high school students. So most of the support for personnel who do research goes through these kinds of investigator-initiated grants. We also have funding opportunities that are cross-disciplinary. So special funding opportunities such as the Biology Integration Institutes or Integrative Biology. And these are larger scale awards that fund groups of investigators. So groups of investigators that are 3 or more, or at an institute scale, as the name Biology Integration Institutes implies. And so again, these kinds of research projects are expected to cross scales in biology, cross disciplinary boundaries in biology. So again, the funding opportunities, there are many different kinds. And so you really just have to find the program that you're interested in and follow from there what kinds of opportunities. And I'm actually going to drop a document in the chat now that I tried to cull a few opportunities that might be of interest to this audience. And so I'll stop talking about them right now and just drop the document here.
Great, thank you for that information. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question from the audience. Here's a question that is addressed to everyone. How can I get funds for postdoc fellowship? I have completed my PhD and I'm working as a senior research fellow.
So I can just briefly say that the NSF has postdoctoral fellowships in several programs. The ones, again, that might be of interest to you is postdoctoral research fellowships in biology, and that's one of the links that is in the document that I just dropped in the chat.
Okay, Jianka's got her
Wait,
hand raised.
Adelita, I don't think you can see the hands that are raised maybe. So Yanka has her hand up.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
was just calling on her. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, yes. So we do not have such postdoc fellowships, but of course, if you want to continue as a postdoc researcher, and you do not think yet to kind of grow out as a PI yourself, we have opportunities, the so-called visiting fellowships into ERC funded labs. And I think these are great opportunities because not only this provides you a kind of bridge into something that you may want to decide later, but you have the opportunity to work and to stay for a certain period of time in an excellent lab. So if you are interested in this, please let me know and I can put the link directly into the chat window.
Great, thank you. I'm not sure if Arisu or Chris was first, but whichever one of you wants to go, you can answer.
You go first, Arisu.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So JSPS has their fellowship programs for researchers outside of Japan. So maybe you can apply for that. One is postdoctoral fellowship for researchers who have just completed their doctoral degrees, or some program has a for PhD course students. And other one is an invitational fellowships for more experienced researchers like a mid-career or professor level. So I just want to share my leaflet here in the chat box, so please refer to that. And so JSPS has grants in aid for scientific research, but they are almost for the researchers in Japan. So for the other countries' researchers, you can apply to these fellowship programs. Thank you.
And in Canada, again, there's two ways to show up with either a studentship, a graduate studentship, or a fellowship. Most of our money, 80% of our money, goes to professors through project grants or operating grants, and they can choose who they want to hire from around the world. There's no limits. So if to who they can hire as far as a graduate student or a postdoctoral fellow. And again, I posted in the chat a little way up, there's constantly updating who is funded with how much cash and on what subjects. So you can actually just search that and find out where they live. And it's a filterable list. So you can go by subject matter, by institution, by location, or whatever you'd like to look at. That's the easiest way to do it. And those competitions are twice a year in the spring and in the fall. So those will be updated twice a year. The second way to go about it is you can get direct funding as a PhD student or a fellow. Again, you do not need to have a supervisor in Canada, but it's helpful if you have a supervisor in Canada. That competition is once a year and it's updated on a thing called ResearchNet. So there's the two different websites you can go to. That's also pasted beside my initials, CM, in the chat. So you've got the links to both of those that you can find to either contact profs who currently have funding, and they can hire whomever they want with no restrictions, as long as you can get a visa to study in Canada, or you can apply directly for a fellowship. Very much harder to get because they pay more cash primarily, and and it helps if you already have a supervisor in mind for those as well.
thank you. Okay, next question we have here is, what advice do you have for those who are about to start a tenure track position? Manju, can you elaborate on this one?
Yeah, sorry, I was in the middle of typing an answer to something else, but yeah, so that's fine. I can speak to this, yes. I don't know, maybe if you're a young scientist, and the best advice I can give you actually is to find time to take vacation before you start, because it's going to be a wild ride. So, you know, and general advice is that, yeah, of course, you can start working on the project most likely to succeed, or the low-hanging fruit projects, but you really should not forget to keep investing in your wild, big, complex ideas, and building the disciplinary expertise, the cross-disciplinary connections you need to make real progress on these wild ideas, and then keep looking for funding opportunities that might be tailored to those interests, because you know, we are facing really big challenges in society, and funding agencies are trying their best to come up with programs or refine their programs to enable young investigators to be bold enough and be supported to try to address these problems, these major challenges facing societies. So basically get to know what are the funding programs and priorities of agencies and how they match with your interests. You start with websites, of course, on email updates you can sign up for, but those things can become overwhelming, and they may be static as well, like websites, you know, it depends on when you go and look. Keeping in touch with funding opportunities that are dynamic is difficult. For the NSF Bio Directorate, so I'll tailor this very narrowly now, it's actually easiest to sign up for our Bio Directorate divisional blogs. We have 4 divisions in bio: small cell biosciences, integrative organismal sciences, environmental biology, and biological infrastructure. So you can sign up for the divisional blogs, and there you get updates on new funding opportunities. You can visit our virtual office hours to get in-depth information on new funding opportunities and directly ask us, program directors, questions. And again, those links to blogs are listed in the document. So really just trying to get a handle on the funding opportunities, and keeping an eye out for where your wild idea could be funded is the best advice I can give right now.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, here is another question from the audience. The question is,
I think Chris wanted to follow up on this one.
Oh, okay, great.
Oh, just briefly, I would say the other thing, it was a spectacular answer, Manju. I would just say the other thing I would add is try and find yourself a mentor or more at your institution where you're applying, and perhaps a couple of people out there in the wild that you may know, especially people that have been successful at getting grants from where you're looking to apply for grants. And 2 other pieces of advice: when you're a brand shiny new early career researcher, it takes a lot longer to write a grant, but also you're going to be doing some lectures, easing into lectures as you go on, and you'll be shocked how long it takes to actually prepare lectures the very first time through, but also shocked at how long it takes to actually prepare a good grant first time through. So I think if you get some good mentors and let them try and set some deadlines for you as well, to say, okay, if you're going to write a grant, have the first draft to me by this day, if this is the deadline, and stick to those deadlines, because if they've been there and done that, they'll be very helpful.
Great, thank you. Janka's got her hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I just would like to add one sentence to all this, because this was very excellently summarized by Manju and Christopher, is that please do not forget, for example, if you apply for an ERC grant, and all this holds true what Manju just explained about not to go for the low-hanging fruit, etc., and having your bold ideas. But we also advise, especially to our starting grantees and young PIs, to try to stand on multiple legs. So, of course, there is the ERC grant, and it's a huge and great opportunity because it will give you a coverage for 5 years. But you have other opportunities in Europe on the European level, but also at national level. And these grants are equally important because you will make your standing stronger. when you have multiple funds and reaching out into other agencies and via this to other investigators and collaborative projects, etc. So just try to keep in your mind that those exist as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So I do not see any more hand raised. Right, okay, great. So I'm gonna move to the next audience question. This is one of our first questions here. The question is there, this is for everyone, is there any added advantage or benefit for being an early career scientist who is in the early phase of assistant professor biology, who has never received a direct NSF or NIH funds? If there is, what is that?
Oh, okay, sorry. I guess I can try to address that. I missed part of it. The NSF, you know, you as a PI, you can apply for individual investigator funding, and you essentially just have to find the program that is appropriate for your research area. You may want to contact the program director. The best way to do that is to send a one-page summary of your research, and then go from there to try and get advice on what program to apply for, and then write an application. Adelita, I'm trying to find that question. I really should stop trying to answer questions in chat and miss what you said.
Yeah, it's understood. You're just full of all this advice. All right. Okay, is there any other? Okay. All right, so I'm going to move to the next question here. We'll leave Manju alone for a little bit so she can answer questions. All right. So this one is an audience question. It is addressed to everyone. What are the citizenship requirements for your funds?
I don't know if Krista was before me, but I can be very quick. None.
Okay.
We have none.
Yeah, same in Canada, there's none. As long as you can get a student visa to come study, you're good to go.
Yeah, for the NSF, for the graduate research, for special programs like the graduate research fellowships or the postdoc research fellowships, there are citizenship requirements. But PIs, as long as they're employed at a US institution, and if the institution certifies them as a principal investigator, then NSF has no requirements.
Likewise, JSPS has no requirements about the citizenship for the grants, but it requires for the fellowship for visiting to Japan. It requires some US citizenship or European citizenship. But usually for the grants in Japan, there's no requirements.
Thank you. Okay, next question is, are there any funding opportunities specifically for investigators in low and middle income countries to support and enhance research in these countries?
Go ahead, Chris.
There are institute-specific initiatives. The project grant competition in Canada, which is 80% of the money, there are funding panels that are like global health, but they're still usually initiated by a researcher in Canada looking to collaborate with people in lower or middle income countries. And most of the institutes also have some sort of program along those lines. So either you've got to find somebody in Canada that you like and likes you to collaborate with, or you can apply, you can search the database within Canada that I posted as well in terms of everybody who's funded, and then it's very searchable as far as topics. Again, to find folks to collaborate with. And in some instances, they must have somebody from a lower or middle income country for specific institute funded initiatives. But again, it's good to have your tentacles into some folks in Canada that are doing this to begin with. So, a little bit of a business development or outreach prior to would be very helpful, but they're out there.
Great. Bianca's got her hand raised.
Yes, so it really depends on, to some extent, nevertheless, from which country are you coming from. But at the European level, we have the so-called Widening European Participation Initiatives. And this is really a plethora and a collection of initiatives trying to close the performance gap between what was typically known, let's say, West Europe before the 1990s and the countries at the east side of Europe. And in addition to that, we of course have programs specifically to some associated countries, but these are really country specific. And I advise you, whoever asked this question, to check on our website and see if your country has any kind of bilateral agreement. And otherwise, if any more details are required for this particular question, please just let me know, because it can much depend on who you are and where are you coming from. Thank you.
Yeah, I can follow up that with the NSF. It's about the same as well. That NSF doesn't generally fund investigators who are working in other countries, but through collaborations, these are possible. For example, if you're at a research site in an environmental biology project, or if you have resources that that would be great to add to a US collaborators project, then y'all could write a grant together, and there could be some funding available for that through a collaboration. And then there are bilateral, binational agreements as well. It depends on what country you're in, as Yanka said.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question from the audience is related to postdoc opportunities. So the question is, what are your postdoc opportunities, and if there are any age limits related to those?
Well, in Canada, there's no age limit, but we define a postdoc as somebody who's within 6 years of their PhD.
JSPS is the same.
Yeah, I can say the same for the ERC. So we do not have any sensible limit on the biological age, but we have eligibility windows, and that is stipulated in our work program, 2 to 7 years for the young PIs. The starting grant is 7 to 12 years for the consolidator grantees, and these years mean the number of years after receiving the PhD.
Right, so I don't quite remember the guidance for the postdoctoral research fellowships in biology, but they're clearly stated on the website if you'd like to look. I also want to say that this afternoon, the National Postdoctoral Association that's in the US is hosting an event that's an outreach event. So I'm going to be there as well, and a program director from that program is going to be giving a presentation. So if you want to go to the National Postdoc Association and see if you want to jump in on that, if the window is still open to jump in on that event, it's maybe at 2:30, 2:45, much after this one. You may get more information there.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question from the audience. Can you send the same or similar grant to both NIH or NSF?
Sounds like a question for me. I'm going to refer to the Biological Sciences Directorate specifically, because we do have a special restriction that unless you're a beginning investigator, and a beginning investigator is someone who's never received US federal funding before. So unless you're a beginning investigator, you're not allowed to send the same or highly overlapping grant proposals to the NIH and the NSF at the same time. So you do have to make a choice if you're a previously funded investigator. You're welcome to send a one-page summary to a program director and to get a sense first of whether your project fits in the NSF or NIH funding program, and then that'll make it easier for you to make a choice.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is, how has the COVID-19 epidemic affected the funding landscape and availability of funds?
Maybe I can start this time. So we kept on being available throughout the whole pandemic, and we haven't really noticed any major drop because of the pandemic in the number of applications we have received. What we have added as an extra into our application form, or application forms rather, is that our applicants can describe if they experienced any setback, major setback because of the pandemic. And so that will be taken into account when during the evaluation process.
I can say that the same is true for the US NSF as well, that we haven't experienced any drop in funding. We have, in fact, over the past 2 years, created some funding opportunities for people, for investigators to do research on COVID-related biology. We've also, created opportunities to support undergraduate and graduate researchers for the extra time that it may have taken them because of the disruptions caused by the pandemic. Other opportunities to support, supplemental opportunities to support early career researchers as well at these, transition points in their career. And so that's, I think that, and as Janka said, we're asking investigators who have current NSF grants or are going to apply for grants, if they wish to explain a little bit about how the COVID impacted their ability to get preliminary data, for example, they can do that. It's not a formal section. You can just include it in the proposal.
And in Canada, the very similar, we did give an extra 6 months cost extension, not no cost. They actually got extra money for an extra 6 months because we assumed everybody would be delayed somewhat. So everybody got some free money. It was essentially the equivalent to 6 months of funding. We haven't seen much of a drop off in terms of our project or operating grant competitions at all. And we actually got 50% extra funding. So it went from 1 to 1.5 billion per year. That's temporary over about 3 years to fund COVID specific research as well. We also have a section within everybody's application, regardless of the funding you're applying for, to also say, did COVID delay anything to do with your research? And it can be both due to research like lab shutdowns or personal reasons.
Yes, in Japan, it's very quite similar. We did give an extra 6 months cost extension. And also Japan had a very entry restrictions for a long time. So most researchers have been unable to enter Japan. So as a result, Japan JSPS has extended their entry deadline many times. And now Japan has gradually eased their entry restrictions since this March. So we hope that all fellows will be able to visit Japan this year. But therefore, the budget will need to be reduced for new applications in fiscal year 2023. So this is because support for the past awardees will be prioritized for coming to Japan.
Great, thank you. Janga, did you still have a comment?
Just very quickly, I wanted to add, but it's more interesting to our grantees. So to those who already had the grant, and maybe just that you have an idea that because of the pandemic, we we managed those requests to extend the period of the grant in a much quicker way as compared to what we had before. So we try to ease the life of our grantees in any possible way it was possible for us to do so. Thank you.
Great, thank you. This question is for, yes, anyone. Could you discuss the expectations or best practices for contacting program directors or program officers?
So I can start. Again, find it's the best thing to do is to get a general idea of what program your research fits in. So look at the websites of the different programs, figure out what their priorities are and the research areas that they cover. And for the NSF, what we like is that an investigator prepares a one-page summary, and that includes an overview of the project. It can be approximately 1 page, just don't make it 5. Which has an overview, your goals, the knowledge gap that you're trying to address, the approaches that you're going to employ to address this knowledge gap or challenge, the summary of the expected outcomes, and the impact. For the NSF, we review grants on 2 review criteria: intellectual merit, and that's the research itself. And the second merit review criterion is broader impacts, and that is how your research, your educational efforts, your outreach efforts will benefit society. So your proposal and then the one-page summary that I'm just talking about should include a section on broader impacts. So once you prepare this one-page summary, you should just send an email to the program director in the relevant program that you've identified. It actually doesn't have to be the very specific program as well. This is a query to that program director. And in the background, what we do with your email is we actually figure out, okay, maybe this is a fit to our program, or we can shop that one-page summary around to other programs and figure out whether you fit better in another program, or perhaps your research might fit at the interface of 2 or 3 programs, in which case we'll guide you accordingly, because in fact we encourage research that fits in between programs. And the one-page summary allows us to figure out whether we can institute a co-reviewing mechanism for your project. So, writing an effective one-page summary is a good first step, and then emailing 1 or more program directors with that idea page is the way to go.
Maybe I can continue.
Okay, great.
Yes. Okay. So in case of the ERC, you can subscribe to our newsletter, or you can just simply drop an email. There is a general email address on our website, or to me even. So you can reach out to the scientific officers. You can reach out to the whole agency through this general email address. And we have a very nice database of already funded projects. So if you want to see where your ideas fit the best, and where you stand, that could be an interesting database to explore. And of course, I think Christoph mentioned at the beginning of this session that talking to others and reaching out to already experienced or more advanced researchers, even your colleagues at your level, it's always very interesting, and you can position yourself in this way and your idea, of course.
In Canada, I posted it in the chat. There's just a one-stop website you can go to, and there's a telephone number, or toll-free telephone number, or just one email you can send to, and it's like a concierge service. They'll just direct you to where you need to go next, as far as whichever program or hunk of information you're looking for.
Can I just follow up again? In the Word document that I dropped in the chat, there are links to the blogs and the office hour websites of the 4 divisions in biology. And these are really good resources for information. And everybody's welcome to join us in the office hours.
Great, thank you for those answers. Okay, another question from the audience. How much preliminary results is needed to include in the grant proposal? Do ideas that are not fully backed up by some preliminary results get funded?
Maybe I can start because this is a tricky question, but at the ERC, we like the bold ideas. And so we understand that if an idea is bold, that the chance is high that you do not have, let's say, a substantial amount of preliminary data, or maybe just a little or none. So how we look at this when we evaluate the project is really how the whole idea is described and explained, and if there are other circumstantial supporting evidences from publication, or let's say, for example, you had conducted research in a similar area where you could demonstrate that some of the similar ideas or the technology that you applied and you would like to apply this to this new idea already worked. So it's a risky situation, and we do like preliminary data, but again, as I said, we do not necessarily require them. And so it's a fine balance between trying to find a way how you communicate your idea and how you can convince the readers that it's a viable idea, even if it's risky, and if it's going to work, then it's going to be a high gain. So that's also important. And I would like to emphasize here that under gain, we do not necessarily mean something very practical or societal kind of merit. So we do not want already to set a predefined goal. As I emphasized, it should be a bottom-up, or we like bottom-up. If you have some already merits on the horizon, that of course is also welcome. So it's not that we exclude those kind of projects, but we do not require this kind of predefined aims in terms of societal benefits and so on. And so, for example, exactly during the pandemic, we have noticed that many of our funded basic science projects delivered a huge added value to how we could tackle the pandemic without actually those projects having said at the time of funding that this could be a benefit at the end of the project. So this was very interesting. And so I would like to advise to try to strike this balance if you do not have sufficient preliminary data, and try to convince with your narrative and how you write the grant, citing other publications and so on, references, the readers that it's really a great idea, that they need to take the risk and fund.
I will say in Canada, it's most of the money through the project grant competition. And I would say that if you're wise, I think what Yanka said is smart. You want some of your grant at least to have some preliminary data. And if you want a subset of your grant to be a high risk, high reward, as long as there's a rationale behind it, usually most people will say that, and that you can point to that's convincing, then people will move there. There is a small subset of our budget that was actually specifically for high risk, high reward research. It doesn't mean the grant's smaller, it just means less people get that everybody can apply. There's just less grants handed out. There's a small amount of money on that.
So for the NSF, there's all of the advice that Yanka and Chris gave us applies to the NSF also. So that's great advice. Just, at the very least, your first aim in a project should be grounded in some preliminary data. But then as you can progressively build your project, it can become more exploratory in nature. NSF also has a special funding opportunity called EAGER, and that's an early concept grant. And that's it's not a grant to get preliminary data. It's absolutely not that. What it is for very early concept ideas that are very high risk, but also have the potential for very high impact. And those grants don't require too much preliminary data because, as in the title, they're early concept ideas. They're small grants, 2 years for $300,000 total, just to kind of get proof of concept settled before you can maybe develop that idea further into a fuller grant, or it dies because it was high risk and it didn't work. So you may look into EAGER, but again, that's not just to get preliminary data. It has to be high risk, high reward.
Yes, and likewise, JSPS has various types of grants. So it depends on the stage or the scale of the grant. But there's early career, the grants for early careers. So it usually don't require so many preliminary data. But the ideas, the curiosity-driven ideas is the most important for those kind of grants. On the other hand, for the more bigger ones, the largest grants require more preliminary data. So yeah, it depends on the scale or the some large scale grants requires preliminary data.
Great, thank you for your answers. Okay. We have about 10 minutes left, so we'll see how many questions we can get in the next 10 minutes. Our next question is, can one apply for an ERC grant before securing a PI position in Europe? Can one work in the UK with an ERC grant?
Okay, so these are two separated questions. And so indeed, when you want to become a PI in Europe, you can apply to an ERC grant. You do not have to have your lab yet at the moment of the application, but you need to have an agreement with a host institute that in case your project is funded, then you are going to execute the project in that host institute. Now, having said that, even after receiving the letter that we congratulate you, you have received the grant, or the ERC is going to fund your project, you can already at that moment, if you have a better offer from another host institute, change to another host institute. So this first agreement with the very first host institute is really just a security for us, the agency, that you will have a place to conduct your research. But we don't care if you move from that host institute at the beginning of the grant, before starting your grant, during the period of the 5 years of the grant. It's entirely up to you, and we do not evaluate the host institute. So we don't care where you want to conduct your research. And the second question was about, I'm sorry, I have forgotten the second question. Can you please repeat? Could you?
Sorry, I'm muted. Okay.
Okay,
The second question is, can one work in the UK with an ERC grant?
At the moment, yes, but we don't know if this is going to be the case. UK is at the moment is an associated country, and we hope that all the agreements and paperwork related to it is going to work out in a way that it's going to stay like that.
Since we're talking about international funding opportunities, I also want to mention that the NSF has, I think we talked about this a bit earlier, but I'll say a couple specific ones that we have in the biological sciences, we have lead agency agreements. These are agreements with particular countries and their funding agencies for collaborative research. And we have these with the UK and Israel and France and Germany right now that are active. And so these are for people to collaborate with US investigators. And if the grant is funded, the NSF funds the US side and the agency in the other country funds the principal investigator in their country. For all of NSF's awards, PIs can ask for funding to travel to their collaborators' labs and learn and share research information as part of their grants. So there's definitely opportunities for students and postdocs to travel with maybe a modest stipend as well to get international research experience. And these are through the individual investigator awards.
Great. I think we have time for probably one more question. And the question from the audience is there a limit on the number of times you can send a revised application?
Not at the NSF. Every grant proposal is considered as a new application. You don't even have to sort of rebut prior reviews, but there is a time at some point when a project, if you're getting negative reviews several times, it's probably a good idea to try to think about a new direction or a new agency.
I can just agree with that. We do not really ask you to go to another agency, but for example, we can have some comments from our evaluators in your documents that you receive at the end of the decision that was taken. And if you were not funded, that maybe your research idea was a bit too incremental for the ERC, and it would be better funded under a national funding scheme. These kind of comments, some of our applicants do receive. At the same time, we do not have any restrictions. You can reapply as many times as you want, of course, within the eligibility window, or then hopping into the other funding scheme. So for example, if you run out from the eligibility of the starting grant, then you can apply in this consolidator grant scheme. We do have some restrictions of resubmission, considering the window, the time window after the first application. So because we have a 2 evaluation step system, if in the first step you have received the B or the C mark, which means that you didn't pass to the second evaluation step, then the B mark means that you have to skip 1 year, and only after that 1 year you can apply again, even with the same projects if you want. And if you want, you can take into account the recommendations that our evaluators gave in the documents that our applicants receive. And if you receive the C in the first step of the evaluation procedure, then you need to skip 2 years. And actually the C mark is the mark when we really kind of recommend to our applicants to heavily revise the application, because it was not really at the level of what ERC expects from an applicant. But it's entirely up to you, obviously. So these are just recommendations from the evaluation panel.
In Canada, there's no limit. You can apply as many times as you want. But again, take the advice of Janka et al. Take a close look at the reviewers' comments and take a look at least in Canada, your rank within the committee. So you'll get an actual rank where you were. If there were 50 applications, they'll tell you you ranked 47th or you ranked 2nd. If you rank 2nd, of course, you're going to get lots of money. And if you rank 47th, it's clearly the reviewers found had major issues with your application, and a rethink might be required. And if you're somewhere in the middle, again, take a close look at the reviewers' comments and try to address them as best you can. And even get a couple pages to say, this is how I address the reviewers' comments prior to actually writing the rest of the grant, to make it really a word.
Great, thank you so much. I think we have time for one more short question. We just have a couple of minutes, see if we can fit that in there. Let's see here. So I think our last question here is, does the ERC ever fund pre-doctoral students in the USA to do research in the US or travel to Europe if we have a European collaborator? If so, what is the mechanism for that?
Sorry, I really couldn't hear the first half of the question. So if somebody wants to travel to Europe,
The question is, sure, I
Yes.
can repeat. Does the ERC ever fund pre-doctoral students in the USA to do research in the US or travel to Europe if you have a European collaborator? And if so, what is the mechanism?
No, in this way we do not, but I'm going to check out if we have a kind of bilateral agreement between the US and any European country, because then within the context of that agreement, there is a possibility to exchange research personnel, students, etc., depending on the agreement between the countries and between those labs. So anything more specific than this, I just cannot tell right now. I would need to know more details about the person who would like to live with this opportunity within the context of the bilateral agreement.
Okay, great. Well, it is now time. And if you would all please join me in thanking our panelists for today. They all gave some excellent advice, and I'm sure now everyone is just ready to go submit some grants. All right. Saying goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. It was good meeting you, Yanka,
you.
Chris, Arisu. Adelita, some
Likewise.
people could not access the document that I dropped. So if you could remind Jessica to send it out. She probably doesn't
Okay.
need a reminder, but just a couple of people asked for it, they couldn't access. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
She did
I
say
will
she
let her know.
would.
All right.